Good morning, friends. Good morning. Sorry about being a few minutes late. I was having issues with my computer. It was not working, so I had to shut down and start over. But we're here. It's working now. Yay! I'm Brian. I'm the pastor here at Christ UMC, and you are here for another episode of PB Reads the Bible. And we are on episode 16 on our journey through the book of Matthew. Episode 16 on our journey through the book of Matthew. So we're getting there. As I said the other day, we're more than halfway through. We're 16/28ths of the way through now. And thank you for joining me. Some of you are doing that live, which is wonderful, and I know others that can't be with us live this morning. They're going to be watching it on a tape delay, so to speak. They're watching it some other time, either today or tomorrow or whenever they're playing catch up. But I'm, again, quite humbled that you find it worthwhile to play catch up when you miss one, that you go back and watch it. I've also been hearing from people that they go back and rewatch it just to rewatch it, which is also wonderful. Someone was telling me they were doing a study on Luke, so they went back and they've been rewatching the videos from when we did Luke last year, just to add to what they're learning on the other. So, wow, thank you. Thank you for that. Anyway, but we're here for Matthew. So go ahead and check in if you're watching live. And if you're not watching live, regardless of what time, when you're watching, go ahead and check in. Let me know you're there. Like I said, Facebook gives me numbers of people, but it doesn't tell me who you are. And I like to see that connection. It's also great to use the comment section to put in little prayer requests so that we can be in prayer for each other, or to use it to make comments or to ask questions. I do go back in once or twice throughout the day and throughout succeeding days. I mean, if you post a comment next week or a question next week, I'm probably not going to see it on this video. But if you do it in the next day, I will see it, and I'll either get back to you directly or I will address it in a upcoming video, especially if I think it's something that everybody needs to hear. I'm glad to be able to do that. You can also do any of that kind of stuff through texting. So you can send me a text 570-351-1619, especially if you wanted to share something a little bit more confidentially. You can do it that way, a prayer request or whatever. So we're going to just jump right in. Not going to do any announcements today because we did a lot yesterday in our worship experience, and there's all kind of stuff in the bulletin, so you can look up those things to see excuse me, what's going on this week and next week, because there's a lot of stuff going on this week and next week. We will, of course, the only announcement I'll make is regarding this. We will be doing this, today through Thursday, not on Friday. So we should get 16, 17, 18, and 19 done before the end of the week. We'll be up to chapter 19 by the end of the week. So I think we're going to be close to finishing this by the end of the year. I'm going to have to take a look at the calendar. I might need to do a video once or twice just to so I can wrap this all up before the end of the year. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Finish. That's going to be my plan. That's going to be my plan, that we will finish Matthew on or before December 31st. Maybe right on December 31st. That would be a good way to do it. Then I'll have to look and see what we're going to do after this. Of course, I need to hear from you. I presume you want me to continue based on the comments I've heard. We'll take a look and we'll see where we want to go next. I have to do some planning for next year's worship, so maybe I'll try to do something either together or keep that in mind to play off. Yeah, so we'll do that. Oh, good morning, John. Good to have you with us. Good morning, Ron. Good to see you as well. Loved your little video. So let's get into it, shall we? Chapter 16. Chapter 16. Continue. Okay. Let's look at chapter 16, shall we? The Pharisees and Sadducees came, and to test Jesus, They asked him to show them a sign from heaven. He answered them, "When it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red, and in the morning it will be stormy today, for the sky is red and threatening. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. An evil and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah." Then he left them and went away. Pause. Just going to pause here. Now this part here it's a repeat. It's a doublet. Matthew, it's virtually identical to what took place in chapter 12 when the same thing happened. And again, to say that it's the Pharisees and Sadducees, Matthew changes that in Mark's version of this story. Mark's only appears once, but Matthew uses it twice for a couple different reasons, but one of which is those fact that he likes to double things up, but he places them in particular points. This one appears in the same spot now. If you were to make a timeline of the gospel, this one appears in the same spot as it does in Mark. But he changes it because Mark says the Pharisees and the Herodians, which are Greeks, Gentiles. But Matthew wants to bring in this other Jewish group, Pharisees and Sadducees. Pharisees and Sadducees would never agree on anything. Even going up against one person like Jesus, they wouldn't do that together. They just disliked each other that much, and there was so much antagonism between them. It is Matthew's way of pulling all of these groups together, of pulling various Jewish groups together for his point of pitting everybody against Jesus, and of putting all of Judaism against Christianity in his group, in his context. And it's not so much not all Jews, but all Jewish leadership, we might say, against his church. That's what he was kind of seeing and pointing out and making happen here. Other than that, it's basically the same story that's told in chapter 12. Good morning, Marilyn. Good to have you with us as well. And again, for basically the same points. They're asking for a sign, but he says an adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given them except the sign of Jonah. And so he's talking about himself being buried and raised after 3 days, and that they're not going to be able to see or interpret that sign. Now, the NRSV and I believe the NIV both have, yeah, they do. NIV does as well. Inserts that part about interpreting the skies, seeing red sky at night, red sky in daytime, and all of that. Red sky at night, sailor delight. Red sky in morning, sailors take warning. Both the NIV and the NRSV have that in there. But you'll see a footnote, you should see a footnote in your Bible saying that many of the older documents, texts, do not have that part there. So the oldest versions of Matthew that we have, that scholars have been able to find and archaeologists have been able to unearth, do not have those couple verses in there. But NIV and NRSV like to keep them in for whatever reason, as long as they have that little note saying that they feel okay. Other translations don't even put it in anymore because trying to stay truer to the original or closer to the original Matthew, having it there. But it makes it's like an added on little thing that gives some, there's some good meaning there, good analogy, saying you can interpret the signs of the sky, you can interpret it, but you can't interpret the meaning of this sign that you want to see, and you're not going to be able to understand it. And he left them and went away. Now this is different. It's not the same kind of withdraw as Jesus has done in the past, where he is withdrawn from conflict, not out of pacifism, not out of certainly not out of fear or anything like that, but he's withdrawn for other purposes. Well, I guess you would almost say out of pacifism. He's withdrawn rather than add to the conflict, or he is withdrawn to teach and he's withdrawn to heal. Um, but this is a little bit different in Greek, and a nice understanding is that he cut off when it says he left them and went away. We can interpret that or understand that as cutting off all communication. He's kind of given up on them, so he's completely cut off the things. He has ended it and gone away to abandon them. Now the disciples re-enter. The way Matthew tells this is the disciples were with Jesus before this, but they're not there now. Now the disciples come back to him. When the disciples reached the other side, they had forgotten to bring any bread. Jesus said to them, "Watch out and beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees." They said to one another, "It is because we have brought no bread." And becoming aware of it, Jesus said, "You of little faith, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not perceive? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many baskets you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many baskets you gathered? How could you fail to perceive that I was not speaking about bread? Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees." Then they understood that he had not told them to beware of the yeast of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Pause. Good morning, Annie. Good to have you this morning as well. It's a little bit sort of semi-long passage. What happens, or what's the point here? The point for Matthew is that the disciples have, we would say, have their eyes set on things of the earth rather than on things of heaven. So they're thinking about physical things. They're thinking about their bodies. They're thinking about what's of this earth, rather than the more metaphorical use of the idea of yeast that Jesus is trying to get across to them. So they've got their eyes on things of this realm rather than the things of God, things of earth rather than things of God. But Jesus divinely knows what they're talking about, supernaturally knows what they're talking about, even though they haven't said it out loud, or at least not to him. They've whispered it to each other, but he knows what they're talking about, and he brings it to them. He says, don't be another way of him saying, don't worry about the physical stuff. Don't you remember, I can take care of you with regards to that. That's not what I'm talking about here. A different kind of yeast is what I'm telling you folks about. And this does go back into his metaphor, analogy, allegory of the yeast in the dough. In the kingdom of heaven, in that case, was good. The yeast just a little bit, and it penetrates everything. But he's using the same kind of analogy in a different way, and he's saying, watch out for that kind of yeast, the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Don't let their way of thinking penetrate into your dough and infect the whole batch. And then they understood it. Verse 13, picking up from there. Actually, before we do, we're going to mention the town and give a little bit of background. Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi is north of Galilee. I'm not even sure if it's within the bounds of Israel. It might be north of the bounds of Israel. It was named by Herod the Great. It was named Caesarea, actually, by Herod the Great when he founded the town, and he named it after Caesar. But after Herod the Great died, and the land was split up among the, I think, 3 tetrarchs, one of which was his son Philip. Philip renamed it, and he renamed it to Caesarea Philippi after the new Caesar, whoever was Caesar at his time, as well as himself. I forget which Caesar that would have been. I think it was Justin. No. Anyway, he renamed the town Caesarea Philippi after the new Caesar and the new emperor, and also after himself. And it was a pretty important town. When during the war of 66 through 70 AD, when the Romans had to put down the revolt and ended up destroying Jerusalem, Justinian, Vespasian, that's it, Vespasian. Vespasian was the general who was in charge of the attack and the siege and the war, and he put his son Titus in charge, and he kind of retired back to Caesarea Philippi to relax and rest and watch the ending, watch Jerusalem fall. So this is the kind of stuff that this place is. And I'm sure Matthew has this in his mind, what this town is, what this place is, when he has this as the setting for what's about to happen. It's a Gentile community, we would say. It's a Roman community, and it's the Romans think they kind of are, in charge. It's where they sat and celebrated the destruction of Jerusalem. And yet it's here that Matthew has this event take place. So let's read it. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Pause. So isn't it interesting that Matthew has it take place here in Caesarea Philippi, Gentile and pagan religious center, and that's where the disciples identify Jesus as the Messiah, not only as the Messiah, but Son of the living God. This is the first time that that's been used here in Matthew, Son of the living God. So I think that's cool. I think there's an interesting connection there. I'm sure that Matthew had that in his mind. Anyway, so what's going on? What do other people say that I am? Jesus asks. And notice the responses: John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, one of the other prophets. So what are the similarity between all of those? Well, there's multiples, but two in particular: prophets. So in other words, the people see you as a prophet, see you as a prophet, which Jesus himself, Jesus identifies himself as a prophet. And Matthew does not argue that Jesus is not a prophet. I'm sure that's why he has this listing in you. But Jesus is more than just a prophet, more than just a prophet. That's one similarity between all of them. What's the other similarity between all of them? They're all dead. So in order for them to think that Jesus was one of them, they would have to believe that one of them was raised from the dead. So we're getting this first century thought of resurrection, that it was there even before Jesus's death and resurrection, that there was this thought that maybe a resurrection was possible. And so they think that he must be a resurrected prophet. And then Jesus says, and it's a plural "you" in Greek, "But who do you say that I am?" Who do you say that I am? And so the NIV's is maybe a better translation, actually, at that point. I like the way they said, what about you? Who do you say I am? Who do you say I am? So it's plural. Who do you say I am? But Jesus answers for all the disciples. Now, remember who the disciples represent and who Peter represents: the church, Christians. And so Peter is stepping forward for the church and stepping forward for faithful Christians and declaring who Jesus is: the Messiah, the Son of the living God. I'm going to read this, I'm going to reread that next verse, but I'm going to change something in it. Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon," and not actually that verse, the next verse after that. Sorry, verse 18. "And I tell you, you are rock, and on this rock I will build my church." I changed that because, yes, Peter does mean rock in Greek. It's Petrus. It was not a common name. It is now, thanks to Peter. It's a very common name, and so we might lose something when we just translate that as "you are Peter." Well, what's the difference? No, because we don't speak Greek, we don't understand Greek and all that. And I know many of you already know that Peter means rock, but maybe by translating it as rock, we'll get a more understandable sense to it. You are rock, and on this rock I will build my church. I will build my church. Now, the word for church is ecclesia, which can mean multiple things. It can also mean school. It can also mean school. A better understanding than church, because when we hear the word church, we think something in particular. Maybe we should even translate it. Maybe we shouldn't translate it as church. Maybe we should translate it as community, because that's what Jesus is talking about. That's what Jesus is talking about. You are rock, and on this rock I will build my new community. I will build my new community. Now, so he is telling Simon, Peter, that he's going to be the foundation. But who's doing the building? Jesus is doing the building, not Peter. Peter's not building the church. Jesus is building the church. This is another word from Matthew to his community of faith, that first century church, saying that Jesus is still with us. Jesus has built this church. Jesus has built this community, and Jesus is still with us in this community. He built it on Peter, but he built it. He built it. And the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. Now, some translations say gates of hell. In fact, the NIV says Hades, but then it puts in a footnote saying hell. Hell wouldn't be good, because that, if you translated hell, we've got those images of hell based on medieval times, Middle Ages times, and that's not good. The Hades is the better translation, with the understanding of what Hades is. Hades is just a place for the dead. It's a place for the dead, and it's a place that the living cannot go. It's a place for the dead, and it's a place that the living cannot go. All right. But even the gates of hell, even the gates of Hades, will not prevail against it. So with Jesus's new community, even those gates that prevent anything living from entering can't withstand it. Can't withstand it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Without understanding, we're going to say that gives Peter and the church the right to judge and to decide who's going to heaven and hell. And perhaps you've even heard this passage used in that fashion. That's not what it means. That's not what it means. The person who has the keys in first century is the person who has the authority to teach. The person with the keys has the authority to teach. The person who, and the idea of binding and loosening is also connected to teaching. It's connected in explanation and exegesis of scriptural passages. It's a rabbinic tradition. It's a rabbinic expression that if you are given the authority to bind and loosen, you're given the authority to explain what a scripture means. So when Jesus tells Peter, and the church, that I'm giving you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. I'm giving you the keys. I'm giving you the authority to teach about the kingdom of heaven. And I'm giving you the authority to explain, to bind and loosen the scriptures. So I'm giving you the authority to teach. I'm giving you the authority to teach. Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Continuing, verse 21. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your minds not on divine things, but on human things. Pause. Ooh, that's the same thing that the disciples were doing earlier when they were setting their sights, setting their mind on food, thinking that Jesus was talking about bread when he was really talking about something else. And here, Jesus is telling Peter, you're doing the same thing, only in a different situation. Now, why does Peter say this? What's going on here? He just said that he was the Christ. He quite possibly still misunderstood what the Messiah was going to be like, and he had his conceived ideas of what a Messiah would be like. And so he didn't want Jesus. He said, it can't be like that. It's got to be like this. So, and Jesus says, you're a stumbling block to me. That's that scandalizon word, that scandal word, that word that means offense. Earlier, Jesus is talking about people taking offense at Jesus. Now Jesus is telling Peter, you're going to cause me to stumble unless you get behind me. So get behind me, Satan. Get behind me, Satan. Which actually, quite, at least some scholars say that when Jesus says, get behind me, Satan, yes, he's using that word Satan, which means accuser, so he's saying, get behind me, accuser. It is that is a rough word for Peter, but saying get behind me means to be a disciple, because Matthew is very concentrated on discipleship. You're trying to take the lead here, Peter, and no, you need to get behind me. If you're going to be my disciple, you need to get behind me and support this and all that kind of stuff. Follow along, not on divine things. Continuing, then Jesus told his disciples, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world, but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay everyone for what has been done. Truly, I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Pause. And this is the end of the chapter, isn't it? Yeah, it's the end of the chapter. All right. So this goes into that idea of the Son of Man being vindicated. Being vindicated, Son of Man being one of Jesus's self-referential things, the Son of Man being vindicated. And there is, in this passage, we can see that that promise of the return, the promise of the second coming, the parousia, which that first century church was still expecting any day. any day. So Matthew uses that expression. There are some who will not taste death until the Son of Man comes in his kingdom. Okay. So we shouldn't read that as, we really shouldn't read that as a statement by Jesus, but as something that Matthew is putting in here to add that word of hope and encouragement to that first century church that was starting to undergo persecution. We're not into the period of great persecution under Nero, but we're starting to see some persecution taking place, and difficulties in general. And so, yeah, Jesus does make this statement about a cross, having a cross and picking it up, and to follow me. We tend to water that down a lot, and we think of minor things and almost inconveniences as being that's just my cross to bear. That is not a cross. That's just an inconvenience or a minor infirmity or a major infirmity. That's not a cross. That's not a cross. Matthew is writing to folks who really needed to pick up crosses and carry them, because following Jesus, being a disciple of Jesus, was putting their lives on the line. This passage means we really can't make the connection to this passage because we are not putting our lives on the line by claiming Jesus as our Messiah. But Matthew's audience was. There are people on the planet who can connect to this passage, who do have to pick up their cross every day, and risk their lives for Jesus. We don't. Not at all. We do not experience persecution. I know people say, oh, we're being persecuted because we can't say Merry Christmas. First of all, of course you can say Merry Christmas. But even if you couldn't, that's not persecution. Oh, we're being persecuted because we can't put up a manger. Well, you can put up a creche in your own yard. Whether or not you can put one up on private property or public property, I guess I should say, is an entirely different case. But that's not persecution. So we really can't connect to this passage. But again, Matthew's folks could. So it's a word of hope to them. This was not a word of I wouldn't even call it a word of warning, and it's not a word meant to scare them. Ooh, end of the world. It's a word of hope and encouragement. Hang in there, because Jesus is coming back real soon, and you might need to pick up your cross. Well, friends, that's going to be it for chapter 16. We will be back tomorrow. Chapter 17, moving right along. I do pray that this has been beneficial to you, that God has spoken to you through something we've said or read today, that you've learned something or relearned something, if that's the case. And as you go about your days, not just today, but every day, keep those eyes and ears open to what our living and active God is doing in your lives and the lives of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, say, thank you, Papa, and then tell somebody about it. Until we meet again, my friends, be blessed. Bye.